Okay, we're gonna get started. This is another encounter of the Transnational Solidarity series. We are very happy to be here today with Fionon Ben Chekroun from BDS movement and Moranom Miljanović, the captain of the ship that is going to join the civilian flotilla to Gaza again this time. This conversation is happening with both of them at the same time, although we could well imagine having these conversations with each of them as separate events, but we're so lucky to have them in the town on this very Friday, and so we are kind of building on the momentum of having this privilege. We are also building on the momentum of several other occasions. One of them is that civilian flotilla to Gaza is going to sail soon, and that we are supporting Moranom Miljanović as part of the flotilla. We are supporting her endeavors, and we are supporting her protection as well. So we want to have a conversation with the communities in Zagreb about the risks that flotilla is going to face and how we as a community could react to those risks. On the other hand, we're also building on a very important momentum, and that is that we are starting more formal, more expansive, wider BDS campaign in Croatia. And Fiona's visit to Croatia is kind of being here for that momentum, for building the movement, for inviting people to join the BDS movement as a global non-violent action that we're going to speak at large today. So in a sense, we are here to talk with the communities included in solidarity movements, and we are organizing this event with the Free Palestine Initiative and are seeing it as a contribution to building the larger pro-Palestinian movement in Croatia. Yeah, I think I want to also say that this series that we are organizing. Sorry, I have something bit my elbow. It's not that I'm nervous, but something really bit my elbow. We are organizing this series also in May, and we are organizing another one in June. We're going to have a little break from conversations in July and August, but we're going to be offering a Transnational Solidarities reader that is going to reflect on all the previous discussions and conversations we've had over the last couple of seasons. And so I want to use this opportunity to thank Nika and Diana and Carolina, Josipa, and all others who contributed to creating the reader. And I'm very happy that we are here as a community where we can also thank Jelena for helping with translations, Maria for doing this beautiful hospitality always at Mama and co-organizing this with us. And I can see many other faces. Some people are here like always. And thanks for that. Thanks for that support. Lovra made a bit of an upgraded visual for today, where you can see our nest, as we like to think of Transnational Solidarities as a nesting event. And we also see the roadmap. So we're hoping that today's event, speaking about transnationalizing solidarities in a bit of a different way than we used to, is going to give us a roadmap of how to walk further and together in a more joint way.
Before I present the larger movements and coalitions that our guests are here to talk about, I just want to do a technical check. We are in English, but just to see da vidimo da li ipak nekom treba hrvatski prijevod. Ne? Okay. Just wanted to do a language check in case we needed it. So then we continue. We continue in English. And another technical note is that Maria will send us now the list. If you are already not on our emailing list and you want to continue receiving information about the next meetings, please sign your name so we can then continue sending you the next events, the readers that Emina announced, and other important info. So Maria will send the list, they will go around. And lastly, maybe I'll just announce that if you want to, if you will be with us till the end, we will have some delicious Lebanese food here done by people who run the restaurant Laziz. So just so you know. Okay, stay. I did the technical announcements, and now I will use my notes to read about the movements that our wonderful guests are here to present. So first of all, Fiona is here to talk about the Palestinian BDS National Committee and, of course, which is the coordinating body for the BDS movement worldwide. And it coordinates boycotts, divestment, and sanctions campaigns aiming to cut international complicity with Israel and the crimes of the settler colonial military occupation that it does, decades-long dispossession, apartheid regime, and now a genocide committed against indigenous Palestinians. With targeted campaigns that implement strategic radicalism, the BDS movement is ever growing and marks substantive impact, primarily when it comes to international bodies' rulings, military embargoes, university divestments, investment bans, suspended meetings, etc., etc. The BDS is organized around economic boycott, academic boycott, and student solidarity, cultural, including sports boycott, and refusing pinkwashing, as well as other forms of denial and erasure politics. On the other hand, we have here Morana to talk to us about the global civilian flotilla, comprised of 1,000 Madeleines to Gaza, Global Sumut Flotilla, and Freedom Flotilla Coalition, as they have announced their journey, aiming to break the siege of Gaza and to deliver aid to Palestinians exposed to killing, starvation, and further colonial erasure. They are starting mid-April with around 100 ships, leaving from Barcelona and then pass through Sicily, and the flotilla will attempt to establish a civilian-managed maritime corridor, hoping to ensure the continuous flow of aid and material to be used for the early reconstruction of essential infrastructure. Besides that, the flotilla will carry doctors, nurses, eco-builders, war crime investigators, civilian protectors, and many others who aim to disembark at the shores of Gaza and support the Palestinian life and resistance. This is the next announcement. A warm welcome and thank you to our guests for your presence. So we can start. And I'm starting. All right. So we will do a little bit of a different format for this meeting. We will start with a bit longer introduction first by Fiona and then another longer introduction by Morana. So let's say 15 minutes each, and then we will go into questions that will alternate one and then the other. So to start us off, Fiona, if you can, for those less familiar, introduce us to what exactly is the BDS movement and its connection to the Palestinian BDS National Committee. How was it started? Can you give us a glimpse into the history and beginnings of the movement?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for the invitation and thank you for coming on Friday evening. So the BDS movement is anchored into a call that was launched in 2005 by a coalition of different components of the Palestinian people and Palestinian society, from representation of political forces, trade unions, grassroots groups, NGOs, that are representing the three main components of the Palestinian people. So the Palestinian people living under occupation in occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza, Palestinian people living in the 48 territory, which is today Israel, and the Palestinian people, the majority of it, who is living in exile among us in Croatia, Canada, US, Germany, etc. And so this call is the result of a context at the time. In 2005, there is there is just 1 year after the International Court of Justice ruling the illegality of the apartheid rule. It's also close to the date of the UN conference in Durban in South Africa, where for the very first time a state, South Africa, consider and say publicly that Israel is imposing an apartheid system on Palestinians, something that Palestinians have claimed for decades, but that was the very first time for a state, and not any state but South Africa, to actually say this is apartheid. And it's also in a period of maybe many of you also involved in basically seeing the invasion of Iraq by the US and its allies, and seeing massive mobilization, taking the streets everywhere, millions of people taking the street, but also the realization that despite this mobilization in the streets, the war happened and the invasion happened based on lies. And so questioning in Palestine a bit the question, what can we do more? How can we be more strategic? How can we do and build enough pressure and enough people power to being able to actually reach change? And that's how the BDS movement is kind of created. It's also inspired by history of often unacknowledged Palestinian popular resistance against the British, and then against Israel apartheid and settler colonial states. It's also inspired by of course, the anti-apartheid South Africa struggle, the US civic rights movement, anti-colonial struggle across the world from Ireland to India. So it's really fertilized into those anti-colonial fights and anti-imperialist fight as well. But it's very specific to what is the Palestinian situation on the ground. And so that was 2005. 2 years after looking at BDS groups being created all over the world, Palestinians, organizations, trade unions, political forces that were signatories to the call decided to create a committee or a body in order to being able to support this movement and this call, to think the strategy, to think how to implement it, to lead the movement from Palestine. And that's how the Palestinian BDS National Committee is born. So more than a bit less than 20 years ago, basically. And that's how the movement started. We will talk a bit later about the Palestinian BDS National Committee, but the call of the BDS movement is anchored into a principle that is basically do not harm our liberation struggle. And in order to not harming us, cut complicity at home. Because it's coming with the analysis and understanding that if this system of illegal occupation, apartheid, settler colonialism, ethnic cleansing, and now genocide is perpetuating itself, sustained, it's because there is international support. Because states and governments, corporations, institutions, cultural, including sport, academic institutions, are deeply complicit, deeply supporting this system, in shielding it from any sort of accountability for decades, in supporting militarily, economically, financially, diplomatically, at every core of it. And so that's really the message, if coming from Palestine, from this large coalition that is today the largest, most diverse representative coalition of the Palestinian society, that is saying to people, if you want to stand in solidarity with us, cut complicity. That's the effective way of supporting us, and the primary way. There are many different ways to do so, and I think we several of doing more and different things, but the minimum called from Palestine is cut complicity. And so through the 20 years of existence, the movement has grown exponentially, with now BDS groups and partners organizations all over the world. I mean, from Chile to Canada, from South Africa, Senegal, Kenya, to Norway, Sweden, Iceland, South Korea, Japan, New Zealand, and you name it. Always trying to assess what type of complicity is existing in the countries and attacking this complicity to cut it. And so the movement, the Palestinians are calling for boycotts, divestment and sanction. When we talk about boycott, as I mentioned, there is the primary economic boycott that everyone think about, but then there is also cultural boycott, academic boycott, sport boycott, that is aiming basically at boycotting every institution and corporation involved in human rights violation in Palestine. Divestments, it's basically calling on pension funds, trade unions, city councils, churches to divest from Israeli banks, from Israeli companies or international companies involved in human rights violation in Palestine. And all of this is kind of creating what is the theory of change of the Palestinian BDS movement, is creating enough people power to influence, to impact, to force government and state to implement sanction. The S in BDS. So we're talking about military embargo, no export, import, transit of military material, including dual-use items. And when we say dual-use items, it's items that can be dually used for civilian purpose or for military purposes, like coal, like fuel, that are transshipped, for example, at the moment through the Mediterranean Sea, in order to fuel the F-35 that are bombing Gaza, and also fuel the electricity grid, for example, of Israel, that has no differentiation with the electricity grid of the illegal settlements, which means that this coal that at the moment is weirdly enough coming mostly from South Africa, is actually fueling the electricity of the settlements and allowing it to maintain themselves. Mm-hmm. So dual-use items, also calling to the suspension of Israel from the UN General Assembly, and that's not something new, that's something that was applied against apartheid South Africa at the time. Suspension of Israel from the Olympics, from the FIFA, from the UEFA, from the Eurovision Song Contest, because that's mainly the message. There is no business as usual with an apartheid, settled colonial, genocidal state. And so it should face accountability for its crimes, and it should be dismantled ultimately. And that's the objective of the BDS movement. It's to put enough pressure on Israel to force it to comply with international law, which ultimately will lead to the end of the illegal occupation, the dismantlement of the the apartheid wall, the end of colonization of Arab lands, the dismantlement of the apartheid system implemented on all the Palestinian people, and the most important, the respect of all inalienable rights of the Palestinian, including, most importantly, the right to return. Mm-hmm. For all the Palestinians that are living in exile and don't have the right to return to the land and properties, as stipulated in the 194 UN resolution. And so as long as those rights are not respected, as long as this system of oppression is not dismantled, Palestinians are calling for boycott, divestment, and sanctions.
You have mentioned some strategies, but could you tell us a little bit more, and especially how do you assess which targets, companies, institutions, cultural platforms, to prioritize at which moments in time?
Yeah. So something that is important to notice is that the Palestinian BDS movement focus on complicity and not identity. And that's kind of the difference with the boycott movement against apartheid South Africa at the time. It's really focused on the complicity of institution or corporation mainly and foremost. And when it comes to, so as I said before, the idea is really to build people power. And so yes, you have the consumer boycott aspect and at individual level, and so we're calling people to boycott at individual level. And something to know is also the European market is the first market for apartheid Israel. But more than this, we're calling people to organize and to mobilize, to create enough power. And so the way we strategize around this, and that we applied a targeted boycott strategy. That's not invented by Palestinians. That was also the case in the boycotts against South Africa, apartheid South Africa, and also you can see it in the U.S. civic rights movement as well. The idea is that there are many corporations, many institutions that are complicit with this system, and in terms of mathematics, if you have so many targets and you ask people to put pressure on all those targets, they will not be able to do it at all of them at once. And so you're dividing basically the efforts and the energy. While if you decide to have a small amount of targets, but then you're asking to all the movement to put pressure on those small amount of targets, then the pressure is bigger and more important. And so that's why we go for targeted boycotts with a small amount of target of 20, 25 maximum, in order to being able to have and to amplify basically the pressure. What are the criteria that we're using to decide which corporation or which institution to target? There are 4 criteria. The first one is the level of complicity. We're going for corporation or institution that are very complicit, and that, I mean, it's proven based on research, but it's also those that are directly involved in violation. So an example that I'm always using, it's Starbucks. As BDS movement, we're not calling directly for the boycott of Starbucks. Not because Starbucks is a good company, it's a shitty company, and you should not drink Starbucks coffee, but because Starbucks is not in Palestine. It's not directly involved in the system of apartheid and settler colonialism, and directly involved in Palestinian human rights violation. Now it's an horrible company because it's going after their own workers and trade union for the solidarity with Palestine. It's also an horrible company because they're proudly advertising the investment in military corporation in the US. So it's really an horrible company, but it's not directly involved in crimes against Palestinians in Palestine. The second criteria is the question of intersectionality, being able to build intersectional alliances. And there is 2 reasons for that. The first one is, I don't know if I can call it an ideological reason, but it's coming from the analysis that all those different systems of oppression are very much intertwined. And while Israel is testing its oppressive tactics against Palestinian bodies and society, it's also exporting them to the world. And so you can find dirty Israeli corporation in many different crimes around the world. If you think of Elbit system, that's the same drones that are used to target migrants in the Mediterranean. If you're thinking of Palantir, which is this AI tech company, it's involved in also commercializing health system. If you think of Pegasus, which is a spyware company, it's involved in spying opposition in Barcelona or Greece or other countries. So you can find directly some connection. The Israeli police is involved in so many trainings in Britain, in the US, to train the US police, and the same tactics used against Palestinians in occupied territory has been used against George Floyd at the time to kill him and suffocate him. So you can see how oppression is basically exported to oppress other groups around the world. Caterpillar is using the exact same tactics of destroying Palestinian house in Palestinian territory that is using it in India against the Muslim communities under Modi regime. So you can definitely see this, and that's how we see the importance of connecting the struggle, because it's at the center of patriarchy, capitalism, climate destruction, and a lot of different oppression. And then there is also, pragmatically speaking, we cannot stay in our bubble and disunited. We need to unite our different movements and our different struggle. And so we will go for companies that are already the targets of other movements, the climate justice movement, for example. Barclays is a bank that is targeted for investing in the UK, investing in Israeli bonds, and also many military corporations involved in the genocide. It's also the targets of the climate justice movement for a couple of years, because it's involved in forced displacement of indigenous population in Latin America. So that's the second criteria. The third criteria is the media appeal. We need mainstream media to cover. So we need to have also people to understand and to know the company in looking at the logo, to know what we are talking about. So we will go for companies that are more known and more famous because it's easier to also organize and mobilize people around it. And the fourth criteria, which is the most important, even if the 3 first criteria are checked, if the fourth one is not, we don't go for it, it's the chance of success. We need success for a movement. We need to be able to analyze the corporation or the institution, understand the weaknesses, understand the point of pressure. Are they worried about their reputation? Do we see among the shareholders some that we could pressure and convince? Do we see that there are already workers inside that we could work with? So all of those, do we see, for example, that they have one of their products that could be a weak angle? Let's think about Microsoft. At the moment, Microsoft is huge. You cannot boycott Microsoft at the moment, but we can boycott Xbox, which is one of the main products of Microsoft, which is also the one that is making Microsoft the most famous and bringing a lot of money to Microsoft. So how we enter there and then working in another way through shareholder activism against Microsoft. So chance of success is really important. And when we say chance of success, it's at short term and medium term. I mean, it can be between 6 months to, I mean, we have some campaigns that have been 10 years. So let's not romanticize neither the work. It takes time, it takes energy, it takes sustainability, consistency, but we can see that there is a way to work on it and to have a way to organize people around it. So yeah, all the BDS priority target that you can find on the website or on social media are kind of fitting with these 4 criteria.
Thank you, and especially when it comes to this chance of success, we will talk a bit later on some, examples of the success that was achieved after. You will also tell us which periods of time. Yeah.
Thanks, Fiona, for this thorough portrayal of the movement and for speaking with such clarity and so much nuance. We are talking now, we are in a part of the conversation where we are trying to understand these 2 movements. They are very different. They have some shared principles. They have some principles that are quite different. So we're going to move to Morana and ask Morana to talk a little bit about the flotilla or flotillas, maybe even. If you could tell us a bit about what is the global civilian flotilla that is currently planning their trip to Gaza? What are the principles of organizing? What are the histories and how this flotilla is building on the legacies of other flotillas that have started sailing to Gaza since 2008, I believe. If you can tell us also a bit more about the planned route, the resources used, the way how this internal organizing is operating currently.
Yeah, thanks, Amina, for the question. Thanks for inviting. Also, thanks for putting Fiona first, because this is the way you articulated beautifully, situating it into a historical timeline and way wider perspective and the tissue of the organizing, which is part of. This is something that I rarely find an opportunity to speak about the flotilla, putting it in its due context. It's very often treated as some sort of an isolated action, a short fuse reaction to some act of violence, or even if you do recognize 77 years of occupation that ultimately culminates in a genocide, still it's treated as a direct action that sprang out of nowhere. And even if you then see, okay, it's a second flotilla, and even if you see, okay, since 2007-8, there has been organizers sending individual single boats towards Gaza with the same goal to break the maritime siege of Gaza that exists since 2007. Still, there is a lot of context missing. And another little thanks towards Amina and the Initiative for Free Palestine that has not only supported me and will support me on this journey, but also speaking to the media, finding sensibilized and sympathetic journalists to actually speak differently about it. And still, back to the thought I started with, I rarely find actually ways to give proper attention to a deeper and wider historic context. Not only to say that flotilla is not just one direct action that we came up with last summer, nor 2007, but it has many historic precedents, and that treating people as a unit of analysis and as a subjectivity, a political subjectivity that has power and capacity to organize and challenge, not just challenge the order, which again puts the ball back into the court of states being the ultimate units of this analysis, but genuinely speaking about people as the ones that primarily and ultimately only do have power. That is something that flotilla, I'll talk flotillas, this flotilla and the previous flotilla and then the boats previously, are only really starting to develop capacity to build narratives and to push their practices a little bit outside of the smaller activist bubbles where this is properly understood. The context and the intersectionality and the historical timeline to which we belong, the now global but previously also quite spread out movements, resistant movements and resistance initiatives of the people, of the working class, of the peasants, of the various oppressed peoples around the world throughout the history. Very often as well, when these questions are asked, like, tell me what is your motivation, or what is the goal of the flotilla, it is a very tricky one. First of all, in a massive mobilization where you have people coming with very diverse motivations, where you have goals articulated at each organization, of which we are 3, and at the flotilla that are also evolving. I remember while we were on the boat last time, early September, it was the first week and we were fixing stuff, and then an organizer that I was close to, she was thinking about this phrase, when governments fail, people sail, and it rhymes and it's quite convenient, and it's like, no, this is horrible, like it's kind of really thinks that this model is predicated on this very problematic and recent idea that governments have the legitimacy, and I won't go into sovereignty, but basically it's also about that. And then we need to wait sort of until they fail, and then we suddenly have some responsibility. It's a very twisted and weird idea if you think about it, and if you educate it politically. It's still sort of a slogan, and it also reminded me in the maritime search and rescue that I've been doing on the Central Med. It was also the early discourse in 2015, 16, of when, because the timeline is also that the first 2 years, Italy especially, but also Malta and some other states, were rescuing people on the move. And then there was, partly because of that and partly because of other reasons, there was this discourse that now governments are failing to rescue, and then the civilian fleet needs to jump in. And only 5, 6, 7 years later was it really recognized that the policies at the EU level are not failing, that they're perfectly functional, doing exactly what they're designed to do and working very, very well, and that we're not some sort of a third sector reacting to some government failure, but that we're fundamentally opposing something governments are doing very well and they're designed to do. And this is the confrontation there is slightly different, because search and rescue still has been operating in a very tight way within a legal framework. Flotilla as well, in terms of legality, it is sailing in full accordance with international law, and even though there is obviously a high level of awareness of what international law means in the context of Israeli aggression in the widest sense, there is still a layer of pronouncing, acknowledging, calling out, appealing to various institutions, bodies, and even states. So maybe a bit concretely to the part of your question, Amina, a couple of facts. We are sailing, the first part of the flotilla already started from Marseille. It's on their way to Italy. Actually, they arrived to Naples today. They're on the way to the final port. And the part from Barcelona is starting this Sunday towards the meeting point in Sicily, where I will start, where a lot of the different parts of the flotilla converge, and sail off towards Gaza on the 23rd of April. Purchasing boats, of course, and equipping and all that part of the story has been troubled, but we have got more than 80 boats so far, sailing with over 1,000 people just on the boats. Of course, it's much larger, the whole body of logistics and organizing in all kinds of ways, several thousand people. I don't actually know the exact number. So that's pretty much the route throughout the Med. For tactical and security reasons, there will be no stopping. And then there is a continuous risk assessment that will be done, mostly taking into account the geopolitical, so-called geopolitical situation that is evolving, developing as we speak. There's different kinds of concerns, a lot of them, and duty of care towards all the participants of the flotilla, but also various responsibilities towards the wider movement, towards the resources being mobilized. There is a lot of very, very legitimate questions. I think we get to speak about it later. There is a lot of nuance in going in various directions in this very difficult moment where we're finally, like some, I would say, a mature phase where we're also adding a new level of questions towards our own strategies and tactics. Even on a different level, not even now speaking about not necessarily agreeing. All of us obviously share the basic vision of social justice and recognize what we are up against, and also that the goal is to break the maritime blockade. But to which extent we attach importance to other goals, me personally, for me, it has sincerely, since the very beginning, been a million times more important to contribute in a meaningful way to a grassroots movement that is global and recognizes and builds the people power, and that is developing this practice of collective organizing to different scale and different levels of complexity. And just doing it, just practicing it and learning by doing. It's at the same time a very simple and an incredibly challenging thing to do. And to that goal, others are sort of secondary. Now, in internal to the organizations, various questions are being opened. I think about the challenges we can speak later.
If you could just talk a little bit about the composition of the flotilla. I know Shireen had a different purpose last year than it would have this year. You have a radio boat. If you could just tell us a little bit how flotilla is going to look like this time. Because we are going to be following you from here, and we'll have a special eye on Shireen, and we're going to tell more about it later as well.
Yeah, in some regards, it's going to be very similar. People from literally all places on the planet Earth and walks of life are joining. Of course, there is probably, I always have to say I'm not in crewing, I don't have a good overview, to be honest, of all the participants, but there is, of course, a need for a lot of media-informed and media-literate people and people who can engage with all kinds of segments of society, and especially some independent, but also some mainstream media. Last time we had on Shireen, we had Al Jazeera journalists, but they're also quite widespread on the flotilla, and we had the idea of the first flotilla was that each boat would have a member of the European Parliament. This was mainly for the security reasons. It was messier, of course, and it didn't work out that 50 boats got one parliamentarian each. So there has been a lot of experimentation. This time there will also be some high-profile people. Greta Thunberg will not sail with us this time, but some others will. So there is quite a... Yeah, on the one hand, you have from journalists, students, carpenters, surgeons, sailors, all kinds of people. On the other hand, of course, there is a need for very specific experiences, skill sets, and people involved with struggles, particularly a lot of people from Palestinian diaspora who have a significant portion of the voices that are given a lot of space within the organizations are Palestinian voices themselves. About the Shireen this time, she will not have the same function. She will not be the legal support boat this time. She will have a different function that I have realized I should not speak about for safety reasons. But let's say she's just going to be a boat sailing in a flotilla.
Fair enough, thanks. Thanks for that. You've opened up an important aspect of the conversation. We're going to be talking a little bit about the Palestinian voices, representation, and Palestinian politics. I just want to amplify one more time here for all of you sitting in this space that the flotilla is going to sail out of Sicily on April the 23rd. This is the very date when we are going to organize public mobilization in Croatia, a public gathering where we're going to send our support to flotilla. And we're going to be watching the flotilla. We're going to be watching Shireen especially because we are expecting that Shireen and the other ships are going to be intercepted. We will talk more about that, what that means. But there is a risk of Moranom being abducted and interned in an Israeli jail. So we would like to have all of you, plus many of you, all of your address books and phone books actually showing up for the public mobilization whenever we call for it, because that might happen on May 1st that this abduction happens, or May 13th, we don't know that, but this is an information that we are sharing here as we find this a safe space and a space that can mobilize fast.
Yeah, maybe in addition to that, it is really not easy to speculate, and I'm really not very inclined to answer this very common question, kind of questions I get about are you afraid and what are you afraid of? But there is probably there's some level of strong possibility of attacks that is not just abduction, but attacks while we're sailing. And yes, so this will obviously be known, and I hope that these moments can be used for mobilizing.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder too. Okay, we thought of maybe moving into more dynamic conversation now with Fiona and Moranom about the Palestinian representation in the movements and some internal challenges and external pressures, and then we're going to open up to you. Yeah. Okay, I guess I'm going. Fiona. So the BDS movement is the largest body or movement that kind of represents a lot of Palestinian voices, Palestinian organizations, trade unions, and so on. And in that sense, it's the largest Palestinian-led movement that we are recognizing now. Can you tell us how does that leadership look like in practice across contexts, generations, spaces, geographies, time zones? And if you can talk a bit about the power dynamics. After all, we all come from the movements here, and we are very much aware that there's always at least a necessity to talk about the power dynamics.
That's a very vast and complex question, but a very interesting one. So let's start by the understanding that every movement, every society is fragmented, politically, economically, based on class, based on different layout of oppression, ideologies, etc. But it's true that in a society that is living under occupation, fragmentation and under apartheid, society is very much fragmented. Because Palestinians in Gaza have not been able to meet Palestinians in West Bank, or 48 of Jerusalem, or in exile for a long, long time. I'm making a bit of a side move, but I was, so I'm born and raised in Belgium. And so at the beginning of the genocide, I decided to stay there, to being able to organize and kind of be a part of the actions there. And you have a big community of Palestinians. And one day after one of the main national demo, we ended up in the apartment of one of a friend. And then looking at Al Jazeera, bombing of Gaza, looking at each other and realizing for many of them that you had a Palestinian from Gaza, you had a Palestinian from 48, you had Palestinians from West Bank, Palestinian from East Jerusalem, Palestinian from Syria, a refugee from Syria, and Palestinian refugee from Lebanon. And the realization that it would not have been possible for them to meet on the land, and it's only possible to meet in exile. And so let's imagine how to organize a movement and to organize common work in not being able to know each other physically and not having been able to actually meet often, or if not never for some. So yeah, this is a very fragmented society. And I would say the beauty of the BDS movement is that in that sense is that it lasts for more than 20 years, which is incredibly hard to imagine that an over-fragmented society is able to meet around a consensus that is the demand of the three rights of the BDS movement. How does it function? It's a big machine. I will not lie, it's a massive machine. Yeah. It's a general assembly. There is a general secretariat, you have different steering committee. It's trying to not be top down, but it has a hierarchy. And it has different way of working in order to make sure that there is a collective democracy happening, with Palestinians being representation from various sort of part of the society. As I said, you have a representation of the political forces, one representation of all political forces, because not for every of them, because if done, then it brings the political fragmentation and all the political discussion in it. You have all the major trade unions, you have all the, for those who are a bit familiar, you have the all the committees that have been built through the Intifada, to basically provide services to Palestinians. You have the grassroots resistance groups, you have the communities representing Palestinians in exile. So it's all coalition. So all of these are representing a lot of people. It's not always easy to move this machine. And so often there is sometimes frustration, because when there is a consensus, you stick to it. And if you want to open the box, it requests risk. So it's risk assessment as well. Everything is on consensus. So that means that everything needs to be discussed and agreed upon. And when we say about consensus, it's a way of functioning where you need to agree that you can live with it. So it's not like everyone agree, that's not possible, that everyone agree on something, but you agree that you can live with the decision. And so this decision is taken, depending on the type of decision, it's taken by the General Assembly, it's taken by the General Secretariat, it's taken at the level of the steering committees, depending of a chart that kind of coordinate and decide of all of this. And then you have the rest of the movements. You have BDS groups and partners that are kind of listening and following what is coming from Palestine, but also trying to not be top down. We're trying to have those space where they can also have an opinion, when they can participate, while being also very clear that some stuff are not meant to be decided by the solidarity movement. There are things that are meant to be decided by Palestinians, not by us being here. I mean, we love discussing, political discussion, decide, especially in the West and in Europe, we love having an opinion on everything. But at some point, Palestinians are saying, that's not for you. I mean, we value your opinion, but that's not for you to say anything on this. So that's this kind of dynamic. Now, for sure, when you have, it's coalition represented by, in a bigger coalition, you have those that might be feeling that they're not considered or that their opinion is not considered in it, but that's also how democracy function as well. And that's the question of the mandate and the representativity. I'm not here as myself. I mean, I have my opinion, I can go way beyond what my mandate is, but I'm here with a clear mandate and I will not go over it because that's not my role. And that's the same when you have one person. I'm pretty sure if I find one person in Croatia, it will not represent the whole Croatian people in terms of opinion. So it's also about like not falling into identity politics, and that's the question of the mandate. That's the question of the representativity, the importance of who do we represent, and that's where the BDS National Committee is strong. Is that it has a representation. It has a kind of a mandate given by its constituencies through the last 20 years. Yeah, I don't know if I answered the question or if...
Yeah, I just want to actually ask you, when you talk about, you know, we like to talk about everything, we like to have opinion about everything, but then Palestinians say stop. It's really how we want to do it right now. How does that, like, can you give us an example? Is it possible, or could we possibly talk about, how does a conversation look like about one-state solution, no-state solution, two-state solution, for instance?
Oh, that's so typical.
Yeah, I know.
This never-ending discussion. Short answer would be that's not your business. I mean, self-determination is about people being able to determine what the future will be. That's not on Europeans, on the US, on anyone outside of Palestine and not being Palestinians to basically say, I think a one-state solution or a two-state solution, or actually let's break all the borders of Sykes-Picot and decide of a whole region that would be one nation. That's not on us to decide. That's something that needs to be discussed by Palestinians. And they don't have an answer to that. If you put 2 Palestinians or 3 Palestinians in a room asking them what should be the solution, you can be sure that at the end of the 2 hours of discussion, they will have 75 solutions to put on the table. Because there is a lot of, this is a vibrant discussion and it's difficult to know. And the most important for now is to dismantle the system of oppression, and then self-determination would be implemented, and whatever we like it or not, it will be on the hands. And whatever we like, what will be the result or not, that's even not a matter of discussion. So yeah, there are some moments where the solidarity movement is kind of hijacking this kind of discussion. Sometimes some groups are even making it like a condition. If you're not for a one-state solution, that's not okay. I mean, I have my personal opinion, but that doesn't matter. Here it's about, again, the do not harm. Do what you can do primarily, cut complicity. Because talking and talking and talking will not bring liberation, will not bring self-determination. So that's mainly sometimes this kind of discussion that are happening in some circle, in some movements, in some groups, that can be healthy in terms of political discussion and interesting to have, but should always end up in the hands of Palestinians, and to have space for them to hope, to think, to envision, to discuss, to debate, to yell at each other. But that's not for us non-Palestinians to have a word to say on this, I would say.
Thanks. Thanks a lot.
And Morana, now we will move to you and continue within this second theme of representation. So taking into account everything that Fiona just now said on the general level of fragmentation of societies and as it pertains to everyone, how do you, and of course you mentioning beforehand that there is indeed presence of different Palestinian diaspora groups, etc., within the flotilla. So if you could tell us a bit more on how do you ensure that the coalition initiative remains accountable to Palestinians rather than driven by external actors, and perhaps to add on to it, where do you see tensions, if you see them at all, between this international solidarity activism and this accountability to Palestinians, of course?
Yes, thank you for a very, very tricky question,
Yeah.
because I do see them all over the place, and there's just so many layers of that question. There are, to start with, I'll try to do 5 or 6. First of all, there are voices pointing very strongly towards the duty to kind of strike at the heart of the empire itself, to do where we are, whatever we can, to shake, well, not dismantle, but to mobilize, let's say, in the most encompassing, enveloping way, where we are, to appeal to the power that resides also very much in Europe. And this is one arm of the flotilla, is the connections as in the Mediterranean and in Europe. The easiest example to give is the port workers, especially the port workers in Italy, but also ones in Greece and Morocco, also in some other places. I hate that my toponyms are now states, but this is the vocabulary. Where we were in a very tight connection with, we didn't, of course, invent it, we didn't gather the port workers of Genoa and say, hey, it would be a great idea if you did it. They were doing it way before we started talking to them, of course. But the point is that we established these connections. We connected to various European youth organizations, not only the Palestinian youth organizations in Europe, in order to spread these sparks within the network and to mobilize kind of along the way. Now this is very messy because there is on the one side this very particular trajectory, right? You're a group of sailboats and you're sailing towards Gaza, and for the consumption purposes of the media, there is this very simplified narrative of we're going to Gaza, we're delivering humanitarian aid, to the point of being even reduced to a humanitarian flotilla, which it never was. But at the same time, a lot of these complications that are very much the very heart of flotilla are what happens on the sidelines, but actually all these arms reaching into the already existing initiative movements, groups that are connected, not only having the Palestine and the Palestinian in the name, but workers in the ports that refuse to load cargo, maybe again being the simplest of the examples of an ally. And this is having a very direct material consequence. Can you remind me again of the question?
Let me see. Tensions between international solidarity activism and this accountability to Palestinian voices.
Yeah, a little bit along the lines of what Fionom was saying about the fragmentation and who is having the word, who are you accountable to? There never was, since the boat started sailing, any sort of homogeneous, unified voice or people or organization that said, we want you to do this. Of course, there are various and there are many, and different organizations, especially Freedom Flotilla Coalition, because they have been sailing for such a long time, they are in touch with certain small collectives and bigger NGOs in Gaza and Palestine wider. And of course, there were people, as the children of Gaza held the journalist conferences of their own genocide, so did they also communicate the messages of we are waiting for you at the beaches of Gaza and you already arrived in our hearts, and there was multi-directional communication going on there, but it doesn't amount to this sort of we are accountable to any specific group or person. We are trying to be accountable in various directions. And then on top of that, and there are very strong Palestinian voices within a movement, of course, especially in the bodies that govern 3 different organizations, which among themselves are very different organizations, structured in a very different way. So in the direction of the power dynamics, to give you an example, 2 organizations have a very top-down, vertical, hierarchical structure, whereas one is fully horizontal, organized around the feminist principles, anarchist principles, where there are no steering committees, it's circles of people where everybody's heard, everybody deliberates, and the decisions take longer time and have participation of everybody. The other two are much bigger and they're global, and they bring very different cultures, very different levels of political education, and various problems when it comes to challenging power, to when you practice criticism, critique, and self-critique. Very often you get all kind of defensive jerk reactions of fragmenting the movement, as anyone who participated in grassroots organizing of the so-called left, more or less, probably experienced at some point. So yeah, that's another kind of group of problems when you have organizations structured in a certain way with some voices being given a different positionality and consequence than others.
I don't know, do we delve a bit more into that? Since you already started, would you say that these differences in the, let's say, internal structures of the three different main segments is one of the main challenges of this collective organizing? Then, at least this is what I'm hearing, but...
Yeah, maybe it's a little bit of a personal take of mine, because I've been in similar collectives, organizations for a while, and I do my best not to get frustrated by just being somewhere in this process of a very non-linear learning and unlearning all kind of things we internalize. And then you think, oh, finally we got there, but then we step sideways and backwards again. And that's all fine. And I mean, it's not fine, but it is what it is. But that's a little bit of I guess a normal practical contradiction, where you're somewhere in the middle of the action. You really do carry some sort of enthusiasm for it succeeding, and then when you see it succeeding, then you just get a little bit frustrated when it's and not going that way. And we all need to remind ourselves just to have patience and understanding of, and in the flotilla that I was part of back in September, October, it was just so diverse, and it was just impossible to expect that you would be on the same page, and it was just also such a short time to get people together and to have them even an attempt at that. We didn't have much true genuine general assemblies. One example of one general assembly we had, we were 400 people in a 2-hour meeting where one person spoke for 40 minutes. And that's obviously not a general assembly. And that personally really got to me, and what is it? I cannot possibly believe I'm being here and sitting and listening to this. But then you just, get your shit together and realize that this is not the only perspective and not the only moment, that there are processes of getting around and getting further, and that there are other ways of seeing it, and that other people have lived through similar processes and found other solutions that you have. So just learn to be patient about these processes as well.
Yeah, you both come from like really big machines. just realizing, how small of a movement we have here in comparison to what you're describing and what conversations you're having and how the process is going on. Yeah, again, both examples are extremely impactful. Yeah, maybe we can talk a little bit about the impacts and the pressures and critique, and then we open up.
Fiona, we have already, as I have announced, mentioned that we could now talk a bit about the specific successes. So if you could give us some concrete examples of something that you would at least qualify as successes in recent years, and how would you measure them? I mean, what is the scale that you measure it with?
It's always. There is impact, but it's just important to acknowledge the feeling that on the ground the situation is getting worse and worse. It has been 2.5 years of ongoing genocide that has been very much silenced these last weeks, but that it's still very much going on. And increasing of genocidal colonial violence in the West Bank over its bombardment of Lebanon. Israel has also passed a law to expand settlements, one of the biggest expansion of settlements these last days since Nakba in 1948. So you can see the situation becoming worse and worse on the ground, and to the extent of the whole region. But at the same time, it's important to kind of take a step back and look at the macro situation, and to think that Israel has never been as weak and isolated as it is today. It has never been as much considered as a rogue state that it is today, isolated at the UN level, isolated at the international level as well. Facing immense challenges economically, also still very strong because of its powerful ally, the US, forming this very horrendous Israel-US genocidal axis. But also looking at the situation today, this imperial power is also shaking. And so how we are in a moment of history that is shaking, and that is somehow what Palestinians teach us is that resistance is important, but hope as well. And through 2.5 years of genocide, they stand, they survive to it, they continue to be on the land, and not only through the genocide, but also through the last 7 decades. And so that's an inspiration, and that's what feeds also our own resistance and support and solidarity here in Croatia and more globally. And so through the last, at least what I can say, through the last 20 years of BDS movement, the movement has grown. And even if I will come to the last 2 years and a half, where it has reshaped and changed a lot, it has been able to reach some impact through the 20 years. I remember that when I started being an activist in the movement, one of the first campaigns I joined was the campaign against AXA, which is a French insurance company. Mm-hmm. And at the time, a report from the NGO ECHO showed that AXA was involved in Elbit System, which is the main private weapons company, Israeli weapons company, involved in white phosphorus, drones, bombing Palestinians, etc., and in 5 Israeli banks. Mm-hmm. And very quickly, a divestment campaign started with pressure inside of General Assembly, pressure in mailing, pressure, reputational damage toward AXA. And 1 year after, AXA divested from Elbit System. It was in 2019, or I think. So that was possible because of the people power being built there. It's also the case for the company Veolia. I don't know why I'm thinking of only French companies, but they're very dirty. Veolia, as a French company, is involved in the building of the Jerusalem Light Rail, which is basically a light rail that connects with a tramway, sort of electric tramway, the settlements with the west part of Jerusalem, and so participating in the annexation of lands and in entrenching apartheid and the settlements. And thanks to pressure from trade unions, from people at local councils level, they keep losing contracts, to the extent that they lost a major $1 billion contract in Bahrain. And at some point, the board said, "Okay, khalas, we cannot lose anymore. We leave the country. We leave the Israeli market." So you can see this kind of work happening already before the genocide. But when the genocide started, people of the world kind of mobilized expansionally at the level of the crime that was committed against Palestinians. And so the movement grown exponentially with a lot of new partners, including in Croatia with Free Palestine Initiative that was already existing but join the movement. New groups arise in Finland, in Iceland, in the Balearic, in very small places to the big places. And a lot of trade unions join as well, a lot of political parties as well, and it has helped to reach a certain impact. And so in terms of impact, Moran was mentioning the dockers. I mean, the work of the dock workers and port workers has been very important. And not only them, I mean, they're working together with activists in different localities. And when you think, like recently, my last 4 weeks have been about chasing vessels of MSC, which is this Italian Swiss-based company, cruise company, but also transporting cargoes. And they are part of pattern of transporting military material. And at the moment, a lot of steel shipment. And so those, they're coming from India, so it's steel from India, doing all the tour and then entering in the Med and going to a Med port. And basically unloading their cargo and then loading again on another MSC vessel and then going to the Med to Israel. And so in every stop of the way, port workers decided to not load or unload the cargo. You had a member of the parliament in Italy, supported and accompanied by activists, that went to the port to pressure the customs, Italian customs in a fascist government state, to confiscate and investigate in the cargo that are at the moment blocked for a couple of weeks in the port of Gioia Tauro and the port of Sardinia. You have port workers in Greece were involved, in Spain were involved, parliamentary question in Portugal. There are Maltese flag vessels, so we go after every basically chain of complicity, and so that's where the work is basically seeing the impact we're able to really have ramification and really able to really create this kind of pressure at very different spaces and places. We can mention also the Catherine, which was this MV Catherine, which was a vessel a few months ago, last year, that was also doing all its tour around the world and be denied in so many countries, losing so many millions of dollars on the way because not being able to stop in any port, including at some point in Croatia, where we were not sure where this vessel were going. So how we were able to reach out and then organize directly. So that's kind of an important impact. I can mention, I will try to be focused on, if you think of economic boycott, I was mentioning AXA. AXA has divested from the 5 Israeli banks after we started the campaign in 2018. So in 2024, finally, they divested from these 5 Israeli banks after so many action, pressure happening. In terms of academic boycotts, that was incredible. The work of students, academics, still ongoing. The Israeli universities are so deeply, all of them complicit in thinking the doctrine of oppression, in hosting military campuses, in thinking the artificial intelligence and new weapons tested on Palestinians in Gaza and now tested on people in Lebanon or people in Iran. There are some of them are even inside of settlements on stolen land in occupied territory. So every one of them, and we can see an increasing amount of universities either divesting from companies involved in those crimes, or either directly in terms of academic boycott, cutting partnership. Recently, the Ghent University has decided to pull out from Horizon Europe without any sanction coming from the Commission. So we hope to see other universities following up as well. But this is not because universities are willing to do it. Some of them are, but with a little push, but most of them are deeply involved in it. And so it's because academics pushing, organizing inside, students doing encampment or pressuring are able to reach that. In terms of cultural boycott, it's the first time that we're seeing so many artists joining the boycott. And you have thousands of filmmakers, actors, workers in the film industry to Hollywood and to main celebrity in Hollywood that are pledging that they will not allow their film to be screened in Israel or to be allowed to work with Israeli companies involved in crimes. You have so many writers that are deciding that they don't want to have to use an Israeli publishing companies, or that don't want to use an Israeli translation companies that are receiving funds from the Israeli Ministry of Culture or Education. So you have this movement that is building in Spain that has passed a partial military embargo. Not because Pedro Sanchez is nice at all. I mean, I know that there is the fame right now of Pedro Sanchez. I mean, Spain is not the worst country on earth for sure, but it has been forced of implementing a partial military embargo, and there is loophole at the moment. So we're still fighting, but they have been able to create such a big coalition, including with artists. And then you have the Javier Bardem of the world talking in front of so many cameras, using its space and their privilege to basically say, we don't want military relation with an apartheid state and genocidal states. So that was because activists were able to organize those celebrities and those movements, those trade unions together in alliances. The Eurovision Song Contest, for the very first time, we have 5 countries boycotting Eurovision. That's massive, including Spain, which is one of the top 5 of the countries where people are watching Eurovision, for one reason or another. But that's big. that's big. And it's basically showing what I was saying at the beginning. There is no business as usual. There is no green card for artists that are cultural ambassadors of an apartheid state to be allowed to perform on stage. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of big impact in terms of divestment. So many pension funds divested from complicit corporation. We were discussing just before it started of even wins in the US. You have the Washington pension fund that divested from Palantir recently. You have the Norwegian pension fund that is one of the main one in the world that divested from Israeli bonds, from Caterpillar over the crimes against Palestinians. So you have this work that is happening at different level, and then at level of sanction. For the very first time, we reaching the S in BDS. Not only with, military embargo, partial military embargo with loophole, but it's incremental wins. At some point, we don't have a revolution happening in one day, so it's kind of steps. But it's happening. For the very first time, you have South Africa bringing Israel in front of a court. It's the first time in more than 70 years that Israel is finally facing at least a little, like shaking its impunity. Mm-hmm. So this is really important. And then you have diplomatic sanction with ambassadors being kicked out, or being embassies being closed, or ambassador being in Israel being repatriated in their countries. You have economic sanction on trade agreement being on hold, but there is still a lot of complicity. And so there is still a lot of work to be done. So what we used to say a lot, we're using a sentence of Nadim Aslam, which is a Pakistani Britannico writer, saying, I'm really bad in, I wish I could think of quotes like this, but I'm really bad at it. So I will paraphrase it, but it's basically saying, I have not done everything I could, so I don't have the right to despair. And Palestinians have not the luxury to despair, because they're facing a genocide, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, military occupation, harassment, and so many crimes on a daily basis, and they still resist. So us, we don't have the luxury we don't have the right to give up. Palestinians have not given up. We're not giving up neither. We need to build this movement, to build this people power, and to find a way to also take care of this movement and take care of each other at individual level. And I think it's also important to think that everyone has its role to play in a movement, in a group, whatever, at very minimum time in translation, doing some social media, organizing some action. And when you're tired, which is allowed, you can just step back a little bit and have someone else taking the space. And then coming back and then growing this movement and continuing to put pressure to end complicity. I always come back like this. I'm like a hammer on a stone. But cutting complicity is very, very key and important. And keeping hope alive is very, very important, because that's what they try to remove from us. Hope. And yes, it sounds the future is very dark, but as a lot of Palestinians tell me all the time, the dawn is just coming after the darkest hour.
Yeah.
I don't know when the darkest hour will be. I keep thinking that it's now, but then they're making it get worse and worse. But it's coming at some point.
Following your very inspirational point of everyone has a role to play, maybe I go to Morana to reflect on the same question basically, which is the success impact of the flotilla. If you want, we can take it into taking into consideration, the resources put into the flotilla, which are large. Then comparing it to its desired results. That's one level. So we can also talk about this external impact and success. But if you want to, you can also reflect on this. You mentioned before having more attention paid internally about these dynamics and so on. So if you want, you can go on both on the external as well as the internal success if you see them within the flotilla.
Yeah, maybe I'll start with picking up on indeed very inspirational, very powerful articulation of Fiona. Now that I think in these terms, comparing to a matrix of success and matrix of impact that the BDS movement has had, flotilla as a specific, although I said at the beginning that it really leans into a deep and wide historic perspective, as a flotilla itself, it is relatively young and it has nothing like metrics of success of a BDS. When we do not have clear targets, we do not have any metrics of this company has just divested, the economic boycott or divestment, that you can point very specifically to an institution that it was, as Fiona explained, very carefully selected with a very specific set of criteria. When it comes to flotilla, the coexisting kind of basket of goals and achievements and impacts come in a very different shape and form. And if I start with the one that I previously said I care personally most about, which is about the school of transformative movement building, this generative transnational solidarity itself, which is huge and also very difficult to quantify, very difficult to grasp as something tangible that has any kind of steps and quantifiable goalposts. Then it's really difficult to speak about impact. So one way out of this is to look at different kinds of impacts. One that personally surprised me, because at the time that we were setting sail, of course, I was aware, I was living, among other places I was living at was Berlin, where the mainstream media report in a specific way, and the perspectives on what genocide is really like, even saying the word genocide, but what does it look like, of course, did not reflect what my bubble was seeing and analyzing and mobilizing around. But still, I had this idea that people do know about slaughters that are happening in Gaza, at least. So it came to me as quite a surprise to discover that a lot of people heard for the very first time, or heard for the very first time in this kind of light, and were thinking in different kinds of narratives. And what shook apparently a lot of people was that some white people from Europe, within a global movement that included people from all over the world, were attacked in international water, something like that. And of course there is a million tensions there, and activists, starting most notoriously with Greta, but a lot of people immediately took a step back and said, this is not a story, like it's not about attacking us, like it's not about us being tortured there in attention. There is 10,000 people tortured in incomparably worse ways, and we are not a story, but in a certain complicated way, Flotilla being a story also channeled a lot of different kind of attention. So it's not a way that I would have measured impact at all. For me, I was way more focused on what kind of mobilizing, unlearning helplessness, unlearning all kinds of things that are in the way of collective organizing that is sustained. That was what was important, but at the same time, again, measuring this. Let's take Italy. So when the dock workers kept their promise, when they lost communication with us, when our communications, I'm talking we as a flotilla now, were jammed, and when they lost communication with us, they say we go in a general strike and we stop this country, we stop this economy, and then the citizens really, like Italy is a specific context where people really did take to the streets, and in the kindergartens, in the schools, the whole country was doing stuff. Then you come to the point where, okay, this is going to happen for a day, a week, maybe even a month, and then what? And sustaining these huge mobilizations is, obviously a huge challenge. And to measure how this translates into consciousness, into different kinds of action, into something that is sustained differently or elsewhere, or there in the streets, that's a very difficult one. Internally, again, there are definitely more things are being acknowledged. There is way more softness in the way that it is dealt with differences. But again, this is a bit of a on a Monday I will say this, on a Friday I will be like, damn. This is just as I come to conclude, a very non-linear thing on both levels, both the kind of a mass mobilization, different forms of collective organizing, and internal collective organizing. So very tricky to measure impact.
The last question from us regards the external pressures. We want to talk a little bit about what BDS faces as an external pressure, what flotillas have been facing as external pressures. Fiona, first, if we could talk a little bit about the different actions that they're trying to delegitimize or ban the BDS movement, from anti-BDS laws in certain countries, political proclamations telling that the movement is anti-Semitic, economic counter-influence of capital towards companies that try to divest, travel bans of BDS activists, just name it. I mean, the list is endless. There are very many examples. So how do you politically and operationally keep them doing the BDS work?
So the BDS has very strict guidelines from the very beginning. It's an anti-racist, non-violent movement according to international law, and very much upholding the right to freedom of expression. And so those guidelines are made to kind of define what the BDS movement is or is not, but also help to secure the BDS movement somehow. The repression is immense, of course. There is so many attempts to ban the right to boycott from Britain to Germany, Austria to US, by so many authorities. The lobby, the Israeli lobby is, it's billions of dollars funding the lobbies and funding the legal attacks against BDS groups and partners all around the world. There is a ministry that has been created in Israel to basically only for targeting BDS movements, which is somehow kind of an indicator that they're really afraid of us. But it's not working because it's a movement. It's not working because it's not a centralized thingy. It's really something that is very vibrant, that is very organic as well, and so we're very clear on basically continuing to do BDS. We have legal centers that are having our back if we are attacked. If BDS activists are attacked, they go into them, they support them in court in order that they can do BDS. We don't want to defend ourselves. We want to be offensive. We don't want to defend the space that we have or the little space that some states are giving us. We want to be offensive. But at the same time, we also need to be very context sensitive. You don't do BDS the same way in very repressive Egypt that you're doing it in very consensual Norway. You don't doing it the same way in Chile that you're doing it in Morocco, in Croatia, or in Japan. It will be different ways, different tactics that will be implemented based on the context. The most important for us is to keep activists in the streets. So we're very careful as well of the type of action that we're doing. We're very careful of the type of words that we are putting out. Every statement, every call to action, it's a lot of hours of reflection, of discussion, to be sure that every word is measured, and to not basically give more possibilities to be repressed, because we are already enough. We are already losing so much time around this. We don't want to lose more. So every BDS groups and partners organization is very conscious of this, and it's kind of also being accountable toward the movement and toward Palestinians as well, because it's a Palestinian-led movement. So what we do here in Europe or in Africa or in Latin America or at other region can have an impact on those that are working on the grounds under occupation. And my colleague, who is the general coordinator of the BDS movement, Mahmoud Nawaja, was imprisoned a few years ago over its activism, and thanks to a massive movement of solidarity, was released. But so you have this risk for sure, and then there is kind of the weaponization of anti-Semitism against the movement. While we're very clear to be an anti-racist movement, we oppose every form of racism, including anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. We have among us Progressive Jews Anti-Zionist Organization. Our main partner in the US is Jewish Voice for Peace. We are very clear that criticizing apartheid Israel, genocidal Israel, is not anti-Semitic. It's not anti-Semite. It's upholding international law, and it's also trying to uphold anti-racism at the core, because there is an increasing of anti-Semitism, as there is an increasing of Islamophobia as well in Europe, and we need to be very cautious of this. And so we need to keep the different communities, the different groups as safe as possible, and to protect them and support them. But at the same time, it's not at the expense of not condemning crimes against humanity and war crimes and genocide. And for many of our partners, Jewish partners, it's not in our name is very important, because they don't want to be associated to an apartheid state, to a genocidal state. That is weaponizing their own trauma and their own grief and their own history of genocide. So that is very clear, and we've always been very clear. And that's it. That's our guidelines. We're very clear. And if there is anyone in the movement, any group that is violating those guidelines, they're expelled from the movement. That we really have no tolerance on those. So, to come back to the question, yes, there is attacks, there is repression, but we try as much as possible to protect each other and to protect the groups. And we have legal centers that are supporting us when it happens. And we're just careful about how we maneuver, and we continue to build also the power necessary that will also help to support us as well.
Thanks for this. I want to ask Morana this kind of a similar question. We did hear a lot of critique towards flotila, especially lately. It's coming out, it's pouring everywhere on social media. We heard a lot about the flotila's anti-Semitism, which became a very typical critique of different pro-Palestinian movements. We've also heard a critique of wastefulness when it comes to resources, when it comes to long organizing, and just taking the time to do an impact that is kind of a huge one and very hard to achieve. But I think more what I would like you to focus on is when it comes to breaking the siege of Gaza. I mean, given that flotillas were not successful because of the militarization of the sea, right? Over the past decade. But if you could talk a little bit about that militarization of the sea as the main risk and what happens then, how are you actually preparing for the risk of interception, attacks, internment, detention in Israeli prisons? What is the strategy currently? What can you share here with us?
Yeah, quite a bit. Maybe just a step back a little bit on the measuring of impact and success, because this touches upon that again. Remember when I was in my 20s, I read this book by a Greek novelist, author, something Papandopoulos, and it's about this mathematician who tries to solve a very difficult mathematical problem and writes on the margins of a book and spends his entire lifetime trying to prove this theorem, I think. And the light motive of the book is that he failed, he didn't manage. And then somehow, I don't remember, it was a long time ago, but I think through a conversation with his daughter, a young person, there is this reflection how it was a major success because he dedicated his whole life to something he found as a single valuable thing to focus on and contributed immensely. And actually, I think he did solve the problem, but it wasn't clear to him during his life. So I'm just saying this example to put a little bit of a nuance in a very binary situation where breaking the siege, when you put it this way, and when you define your goal, even though there is way more nuance, as I mentioned, and it's difficult sometimes to communicate in a media that articulates questions in a very specific way, and there is definitely a responsibility for articulating it on the flotilla organizations themselves with the continuity from 2007, but it is definitely making your life, your own activist life very hard when you define it in this way, and you're constantly facing a military that stops you, that intercepts, which actually, legally speaking, is not an interception, of course, it's a kidnapping, it's an act of terrorism, etc. It is not actually factually correct, because there has been boats that did make it to the shores of Gaza. Not all of the boats were stopped and kidnapped. It's been a while ago. But coming back to the present moment, the last flotilla was stopped, and I'm very much expecting this flotilla to be kidnapped as well. So if the reductionist approach to the success is such that if we're stopped, we didn't fail, then we failed before we even set sail. That is very clear. One of the important themes, it's a bit weird to call it a theme, that is kind of entailed in your question. I mean, the militarization of the Mediterranean is something that is very much attempted to be talked about differently. For example, when there is drone attacks, there are attempts to talk about the military industry, the complicity of European companies, of different governments, of the people themselves, with more nuance than before. And this is something that I feel we only really began making a lot of connections. A few of us kind of drew attention to the skies full of the drones. So while sailing in the night, once you pass kind of when you get into a eastern Mediterranean, really the sky is intensely starry, or it was meteorologically, it could have been. It was very, very pretty, and also covered with drones. So it was around the time of the nightfall, you just start detecting which drones are the surveillance drones and which drones are the ones that you should actually really be scared of, because they're the Israeli drones that might attack you. And that's while you're living and sailing in the flotilla. When you're trying to communicate this to the outer world, it is definitely one of the possible segues to talk about how militarized this space is, and how this lived experience can be communicated in a different way to point to this geography of a Mediterranean that has also been even labeled as a Black Mediterranean before there was even analysis by the civil search and rescue organizations that called it the biggest graveyard of the world. All these layers and entanglements of state control and profit, where the militarization is a process that is definitely escalating massively. We are only finding ways to really speak about this in a way that connects also with more specific targets, and I think we are somewhere early on the way of connecting with other spaces that do have means of establishing more specific targets and campaigns to make this a bit more tangible to the people. I think this image of drones, if it's just taken on the very superficial level, then it just translates the question of, oh, you're so brave, you're being attacked by the drones, and you're special, right? And you're going as a part of flotilla, like, I couldn't do that because I'm afraid of drones. And that's really not useful to our movement at all. So I find this question very difficult. But very important aspects of flotilla goals to draw this attention and to connect these dots when it comes to militarization of space. And there was the part of the question before that?
No, I think I wanted you to talk about these risks that you're going to be facing and how are you prepping for that? What is the strategy?
Yeah. So also a little bit a parallel with Fiona was saying, once you, we're not there yet, I think, compared to BDS, but there will be all kinds of smear campaigns and infiltrations. We've had them a lot, and all kinds of attacks that tangle very legitimate concerns with very malicious attacks and attempts to undermine. One example is, apparently, this is a rumor, I don't know if this is actually true, but there has been apparently some entities trying to impersonize the GSF, the Global Sumut Flotilla, when it comes to finance, so when it comes to how money is being used, to actually sign some papers as if they were GSF, which then interacts with legitimate questions about use of resources that I do believe I find it quite plausible that some mistakes were made. I cannot give you an example, but I would be very surprised if everything worked with no mistakes ever being made. So there is, I haven't actually, it hasn't reached me, the part of the criticism about anti-Semitism. That's interesting. Not at this stage, but there is a lot of critiques level that have to do with tactics, with strategy, with use of resources, and I think there are nuanced questions there. There is good arguments that not so much I think about the use of resources because it's not a one board and one game, and there is only this amount of resources, and if you are not using it here, it will go there. I think there is a lot of very problematic logical thinking or not faults in logical thinking when it comes to these lines of reasoning. But coming back to the how do we prepare, we're having an ongoing risk assessment by internal groups and taking reports from external bodies. It's a trouble process. It's ongoing, and so far the decision sort of has been made to reassess at every nautical mile, and especially to reassess in certain legs of the journey. So there is a commitment to not just keep sailing, besides obviously not being martyrs and not wanting to just die to prove I don't even know what. There is no commitment just to sail no matter what. There is a commitment to sail with constant reassessing of the situation, tactics, strategy, and what we're being called and to do. That doesn't mean that we have one body we're accountable to, as I said previously, but it certainly does mean that flotilla does have accountability towards participants and going in various directions outward, and that there are other strategies considered. Some of them are more daring and more risky. For example, blocking military ships, which is not what we have done so far, is a very, very risky thing to do with, like, as you know, like on the individual level, a captain of a ship who does this will spend several years or decades in a jail. So this is not something that, when I considered it personally some years ago, it's not something I've done, and I very much would admire captains who do that, but it is not an easy decision to make. That's an example. It's not a concrete plan of a flotilla, not at all. It is only that reassessment of specific tactics is something that we have a commitment to, and that delay, a change in tactic, change in route, all of these things are very much on the table.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliana and Moranom. And now we can open this space to our audience. I'll look at let's see if we have any questions before we decide on how much questions can we take.
Maybe I missed the information, but will you be streaming again from the boats the entire time?
The YouTube streaming was only happening at the moment of kidnappings. There will be a lot of journalists. There will be some streaming pretty much all the time. I don't think last time there was like really literally all the time, but there will be.
I mean, even before the kidnapping, I was watching streams. So
yeah, there will be streams. There will be again. Last time, forensic architecture did a tracker, so people were able to follow the boats as they move and get all kind of metadata about the journey. And yes, there will be streaming and reporting. There will also be, I'm happy I remember this, there will also be a specific boat that it will carry I would like to say pirate radio. It's not really going to be pirate, it's a radio. But it will be emitting non-stop, not only from the boat. So it has a station in France, in Lyon, where a collective is collecting contributions from anyone who wants to apply from all over the world, particularly musicians, other artists, people with a poem, a speech, a contribution, a challenge, a thought, whatever, that anyone can send an application to the radio. I totally invite you to do that if any of you feels like a musician or anything else, activist. So that's one of the routes is just, or one of the ideas is to connect in a tighter way the activist communities and the people around the world with the flotilla, but also to stream and we will have daily updates from the flotilla. So there will probably be 1 hour in a day where recordings from all kinds of the boats, audio recordings will be broadcast to the world. A sailor, a close friend of mine, is working with various collectives on the details of this. So the boat is already underway. It's just departed from Marseille, and it will be broadcasting what we do.
Any other questions?
There are too many questions at a time.
There is no stupid question. Let's state it already.
Antonia, I can see you.
No pressure. No pressure on people.
Oh, sorry.
Okay,
No, tell us, we obviously have a sense of how we can support you, but it is also maybe good to tell us what we can do. For me, BDS was very important at the beginning of my a sort of awareness of what is happening in Palestine, BDS was really a shift, because until that point I just felt hopelessness and nothing I can do. And with BDS I realized every single person can do something, even within the four walls of your home. You can decide without telling anyone that you are boycotting something. If for some reason you cannot do it publicly, but of course there are many different levels of engaging and being active. Tell us from your side what is something we can do, and what would help.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question.
But also that goes for the global flotilla as well.
I started. Okay. No, thank you so much for the question. And I know it's coming from someone that is already doing much more than just consumer boycotts. But it's good to start by this very individual level, because indeed you can boycott Coca-Cola, you can boycott Israeli fruits or vegetables from your home, but you need to do so much more. And that doesn't mean that it's huge and immense. One of the campaigns that we're discussing and that we're going to discuss with some collective is the Apartheid Free Zone campaign, which is a campaign that is global and is aiming to have spaces declaring themselves free of apartheid. What does that mean? That means that any business, any restaurant, any sport club, any theater, any cinema, any pharmacy could decide to start this journey of becoming apartheid free by respecting the BDS call and boycotting the priority targets. For pharmacy, that would be to not selling or exclude from the procurement Teva Medicines, which is an Israeli company producing medicines involved in keeping the Palestinian economy captive, but also involved in so many corruption deals, opioid crisis in the US. And so that could be a way to do so. As a theater, to apply it and respect the PACB guidelines, the guidelines from the Palestinian academic and boycott and cultural boycott campaign, basically deciding to not offer a stage for Israeli complicit cultural institutions. So, for example, talking about something in Croatia, you have in Rijeka a campaign against the performance of the Batsheva dance company that is considered obviously publicly by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Israel as their cultural ambassadors, getting money directly to do this job, and so participating directly in the art washing of Israeli crimes against Palestinians and the killings of so many amazing Palestinian dancers, or so many Palestinian dancers that are imprisoned, being tortured at the very moment. So how to basically take a stand and saying, as a theater, we actually don't want to stage and to offer a stage for normalizing an apartheid and normalizing war crimes. So theater could become apartheid free. If it's a box club, I don't know, maybe you have sponsors from Reebok, which is this clothes brand shoes company that is the new sponsor of the Israeli Football Association, that it includes football teams from the illegal settlements. If you are a library, you could be sure that you're just not having on your shelves some books that are translated or that are published by Israeli publication or translation companies. So there is different way actually that can be very close from us to do that. If you're working in a company and you're seeing that your printers and your computer are HP computer, we don't call people to throw their computer. That would be a disaster, climatically speaking. But to implement and check the department in the corporation that is involved in deciding which contract to have with which company, and implement a procurement policy that would exclude corporation involved in atrocity crimes. Anywhere it occurs. So it can be this kind of work to be done. We were discussing also the global sumut flotila that is made of different organizations. And for example, in Greece, after I'm so bad with name, the Sumud movement in Egypt, that were aiming to reach Rafah, you had a big delegation from Greece, and when they came back to Greece, they were kind of starting to be involved in an ethical tourist campaign that we call No Room for Genocide, because you have so many war criminals, Israeli war criminals, taking vacation from genocide and enjoying Greece shores, Cyprus, and so many other countries in all impunity. And so there has been a massive movement in Greece, mainly from those new people joining BDS Greece and other groups in solidarity to stop Israeli crews with war criminals on it, or to push for a visa application at the level of state to have investigation on anyone coming to make sure that they're not involved in war crimes and crimes against humanity. So there is some ways that can be done to be involved. Apartheid free zone is one of them. If you are an artist, if you are an academic, if you are students, there is so much way to where you are to start building and joining existing groups as well. There is Free Palestine Initiative is an official partners of the BDS movement. It's part of the movement. We're discussing the campaigns that we want to raise. So there is ways to be engaged, and again, there is a room for every activist. Whatever the time you have as a single mother, whatever the time you have as a student in high-tech technology, I mean, there is always a way to be involved at your own capacity and your own level. And this is so important to be part of a movement. And so starting by boycotting Coca-Cola, McDonald's, and all those brands that are very complicit is the basic, and then you can go so much further. And I will end by saying it's also so important to be part of a community. I don't want to make it about myself, but that's true that these last 2 years and a half, without the community around us and around me, I mean, you collapse with what you're seeing, and you're just looking at it. You're not experiencing genocide directly on your bones and your flesh. So it's important to be part of those space because it's make you feel that you're part of making it fall at some point. And it's important to make it home, very much important to make it home as well, and to connect with current struggle. I will add a last example because it's a funny one. I'm coming from a very small village in Belgium, and we had the amazing idea, not us, but the city council, has an amazing idea to have a McDonald's in our village. And I can tell you that when I saw this, I was like, no.
This is not going to happen.
Over my dead body. I was like, there is no way. Then I started, I'm also involved in some community, like some groups in my village, and I was like contacting everyone, and I was like, okay, I'm ready for a campaign. So we start checking a bit what was the contract, what was the plans, where they wanted to make the McDonald's. They wanted to put it in a place where there were a river, that they would like move the river to have the McDonald's, like cutting some trees, and then you had like all those people, yeah, it's bringing some job. I'm sorry, McDonald's, it's so bad for workers' rights. It's just horrible job, horrible condition. So we kind of built the campaign with bringing together some local, absolutely, it's a village in Belgium, not knowing what's happening, but it was not Palestine the center of it. But I mean, everyone put a bit of its bits in it, and then we went to the city councils, we had a mailing campaign, and then we started going to the different ministries at the regional level that were in charge of it. I mean, I really put all my knowledge in it to do it, and ultimately there is no McDonald's anymore in my village. So that's what collective power is able to do, and it needs to be bring back to home. It needs to talk to the people, and it doesn't need to be always about, like, Palestine needs to be in it when it's mentioned, but it's important to be intersectional with other groups, and kind of it's part of education. It's part of educating about intersectionality, but it's also about cutting complicity at the same time and showing that it's possible to do it. And yes, it took they were not prepared to this. So after 3 weeks, I had the whole campaign plans, and 3 weeks was only necessary to get it up or down. So that was cool. But at the same time, it needs time as well. Changing policies, changing behavior, putting pressure takes time. So it needs to be constant, it needs to be sustainable, it needs to be gradual, and it needs to keep the energy, because it's sometimes not really nice to do BDS work. It's sending emails, it's writing letters, it's meeting politicians, this kind of not always funny work for those that want to put the body in front of weapons manufacturers. That's also part of the tactics, but it's a range of different tactics that can be done, and based on what you like, based on what you're ready to do, based on what risk you want to take, there is a place and a space for everyone in the room in those campaigns. That's it.
Well, yeah, a lot to add. So, to the diversity of tactics, starting where you are at, choosing the level of engagement, choosing the level of risk, but I want to focus more on collective power. And there was this word that Fiona just used, community. And in the activist discourse, this has become first very taken for granted, and I think then a very troubled word. And I think outside of the activist bubbles, a lot of people are like, what is actually community? Mm-hmm. And that kind of really goes to the part of the root causes of the system producing things like genocide. Saying maybe let's just focus on what friendship networks are, and be really where you're at, whatever circumstances we're at. Yes, maybe let's start small and start, as you said, within the four walls, individual. If possible, let's not start there. Let's not start at the consumer boycott, I'd say, but it is something. Especially if it does lead to the collective organizing. And this is where I think, again, impact is a trap. Because it is supposed to be primarily a procedural thing, a school of autonomy. So when you're getting your friends together and doing whatever, it can be like a screening of a thing with Lebanese food for, I don't know, I mean, it's not trivial. This is already I'm trying to give a simple example, which actually is not simple to organize something like that. But as you're doing this, you will face things that you never thought about. This is the kind of the meat of the collective organizing. And it's the same if you're organizing a barbecue or a flotilla. Sure, you will have different layers added to it, 1 million layers. But this is the same kind of a world that you're dealing with. And you're learning while you're organizing a barbecue. And that's where collective power is built. And this is where... probably let's be aware that the impact is a trap, and that you will be coming, as I am and as many of us are, from this culture where we internalize that we have to have a measurable impact and deliverables, and what the fuck is this barbecue actually doing? But not always. Sometimes a barbecue is a barbecue, and sometimes your friend groups will have conversations and be empowered to organize something else. And then after 5 barbecues, they will organize something else, and there will be a community. Or maybe you will not call it a community, and we even shouldn't. But there will be a group of people ready to take time, to put effort, to organize something, and that can scale up. And even if it doesn't scale, not everything needs to scale. Something can stay small and connected, and sometimes things are better to stay small and connected. And their impact sometimes fuzzy, messy, and not very grandiose. So I would say it doesn't need to follow this kind of vertical path of you start with an individual consumer boycott and then you end up, maybe not, maybe just really start with a barbecue and figure out the same things that I'm sharing a frustration when it happens on a level of a transnational huge mobilization that is facing IDF. Some of the same problems you will actually face at the barbecue, and learn how to go further. So I hope this was more discussion.
Thank you all. I think we don't have any more time for questions, but we can move now to the barbecue. If you will just allow me one 20 seconds to announce that our transnational connectedness continues, and that next month we are welcoming an activist directly from Sicily, who is also involved in the Palestinian solidarity movement in Palermo. So this is something important for me to note here. But he will be talking. We can touch upon those things as well. But he is also active in the migrant justice movement. As an activist that has started his own association, Gambian Association in Palermo, also active in the Right of Movement for All initiative. So basically, we have been trying to bring him for the last exactly 1 year. Finally, we have managed. So my dear friend, Comrade Mustafa Jarju, will be joining us on 22nd of May, where we will be talking about anti-colonial stirrings movements in West Africa, but we will also absolutely touch upon the question of deaths in the Mediterranean Sea, migrant justice, migrant movement justice, and things and topics of that sort. We are bringing him again, not on our usual Friday, but on the third Friday of the month, because on the 25th of May is Africa Day. So this is also one of the reasons why we're bringing him then. Another is because he has exam obligations before, so we had to adjust. So this is something that I really wanted you to note already in your calendars. 22nd of May, 23rd of May, the African Association, Africans in Croatia Connect, are organizing the Africa Day celebration in Ribnjak, which Pavlica and their great team are hosting, so I would also invite you for that. Mustafa will be a guest there too on the next day, speaking about Pan-Africanism, so you can hear a bit more on that too. And probably on Sunday we will organize a workshop with Mustafa on mobilization, so maybe he can teach us some very good lessons from this really intersectional movements in Palermo and brother in Sicily, and on how they do it there. So yeah, this, I just wanted to announce this. You will also be getting the announcement in the email. We already have it done because we wrote it a year ago when we were expecting Mustafa to join, so this will be an easy one to type. The only problem that might appear is that Mustafa might not be allowed to board his flight. So I am hoping that he, of course, will come. But yeah, let's see. We will know that the day before, so we will see then what to do. But yeah, hopefully, and I'm sure we will have Mustafa here joining us. Emina, I don't know if you want to...
Thank you for the great listening capacity.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you so much, and please eat and have fun.
Thank
We'll
you.
keep hanging out informally.